That is like the exact reason why I love P-Town. I get claps before I've done anything. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Fine Arts Work Center. Thank you for being here and being part of FAWC extended community. My name is Devin Mathis. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the interim artist service manager here at FAWC. Since 1968, FAWC has played a central role in sustaining artists and writers at critical moments in their careers through our fellowships, residencies, workshops, and public programs like FAWC Friday. These gatherings reflect our commitment to artistic excellence, access, and long-term cultivation. Oh, Jesus, I'm just stumbling over everything. I'm gonna try that again. These gatherings reflect our commitment to artistic excellence, access, and long-term cultural stewardship, and they give us a chance to open our doors and share this work together. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome visual artist Jim Drain and writer Michael Degler, who will both be sharing their work with us and then followed by a Q&A. Tonight, we're also delighted to welcome Elise Patterson and Andrew Cho from Abilities Dance Boston. Over the course of their short-term residency this past week, they've been working on something especially moving, weaving recordings of Elise's 95-year-old grandmother recorded in Mississippi into a new piece of work. Y'all will experience that piece here in this room directly after the Q&A, while Elise is performing live on a dulcimer. Abilities Dance work centers on disrupting ableist assumptions and advancing intersectional disability justice through dance, sound, and embodied storytelling. We're honored to share this space with them tonight. So please take the time to visit them after we all move out of this room into the gallery, where they'll also have a dance and music performance. Also after the Q&A tonight, copies of Michael Degler's award-winning novel, Early Sobrieties, will be available for purchase in the back. Many studios of our current FAWC Fellows will be open, so look for colorful banners above the studios and go in and say hi. The print shop is also open for hands-on making with the wonderful print shop manager, Vicky Tamako. I'd like to thank George's Pizza for feeding us this evening, and of course, and I'd also like to thank the phenomenal DJ J Boom for their music. FAWC Friday is made possible thanks to the Mass Cultural Council, Provincetown Tourism Fund, and the Arts Foundation Cape Cod. If you find yourself moved by this experience tonight, we invite you to support FAWC so we can continue providing time, space, and resources to artists and writers for generations to come. Quick notes before we get started. So restrooms and water are located in the hallway to your left, my right. Assisted listening devices and seat cushions are available at the back. And if you have not already, please take a moment to silence your phones. And now, it is my pleasure to welcome current FAWC Fellow Ariel Miller, who will introduce our first presenter.
Hello. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Michael Degler and to welcome him back to Provincetown. Degler is the author of Early Sobrieties, which won the 2025 Penn Hemingway Award for a debut novel. In announcing the award, the judges called this book an exquisitely honest, humorous, and poignant depiction of life on the far side of addiction. Its protagonist, Dennis Monk, begins the novel 6 months into a fragile recovery, but unlike other canonical novels of addiction, which cover the harrowing benders and narrow escapes of life under the regime of dependency, Degler's novel is intentionally, singularly focused on Monk's life in the aftermath, couch surfing around a changing Philadelphia, colliding with old friends, and trying to keep a brisk pace ahead of his most haunted memories. It is a phenomenally funny book, funny even at the level of its sentences, which have a springy, wry wit of their own. And it was my experience reading that the propulsive energy of these sentences was just so fun and delightful that I often didn't realize that the prose was leading the reader up and up until suddenly it would reveal that we'd been climbing to a precipice that led out onto either a sheer drop into grief or a sweeping landscape of enlightenment. This is a work that, to quote one more time from the PEN Hemingway Award Committee, lays bare the beautiful terror of each blank day and the raw miracle of being alive. And there are copies for sale in the back. Degler's short fiction has appeared in Harper's, McSweeney's, Electric Literature's Recommended Reading, and elsewhere. He is the recipient of a National Magazine Award and an O. Henry Prize, has received support from the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts, and was a 2016-2017 Fellow of the Fine Arts Work Center. Please join me in welcoming Michael Degler.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Ariel. That was so nice. I'm a little nervous to be here, honestly. So I was a fellow here 9 years ago, and I was 28, and I was 3 years sober. And before I came here, I was living in my parents' house outside of Philadelphia, and I didn't have very much going on in my life. And so it was this wonderful escape to get to come up here for the winter. And when I got here, everybody was from New York, and most of the other fiction fellows already had book deals, and I felt very parochial and unaccomplished. And it was a weird winter. Trump got elected the first time about a month after we got here, and I fell in love with someone I met up here. I got my heart broken. I got almost no writing done the entire winter. And it was truly one of the greatest experiences of my life. And this place just means so much to me, and I'm so happy to get to come back and read. So this is the book that I was working on when I was here, or pretending to work on. I read part of this for my fellows reading, and if it isn't too self-indulgent, I'm going to read the same part tonight, just for the symmetry of it. So yeah, I think Ariel said everything you need to know about the book. This is a guy who's recently sober. He's just kind of couch surfing through Philadelphia, and this chapter is called Kid Stuff. Me and Cudahy were strictly anti-violence. There was enough of it out there already. We read about it in Cudahy's Twitter feed and on Facebook, and a few days after the fact in Philadelphia Weekly and Philadelphia City Paper, which we always remembered to pick up at the pharmacy in Point Breeze. We sat in Cudahy's kitchen and read the papers with our coffee mugs in hand. When the weather permitted, we sat in her backyard. We drank coffee at all hours of the day and night. We were both on the wagon. There was one story about an assault at our alma mater in North Philadelphia. A man got knocked down coming out of the Hillel Center by a group of guys who had just been turned away from a frat party down the block. Slurs were deployed. The man's nose was broken. He was a Jewish guy. He was not a student at the university, just a caterer leaving after Shabbat dinner. His assailants were garden variety Gentile hoodlums. They were students at the university. It wasn't a terribly elite university. The frat that turned them away was the Jewish frat, so I could kind of see how the whole thing came about. Booze was involved, that spirit of discord. The papers called it a hate crime. You can't just go around hitting random Jews, I said to Cudahy. We were sitting in her backyard. She had a little garden table topped with blue and green tiles where we could set our mugs down, next to a pot with a basil plant. If anybody, they should have just hit the frat guys. That's who they had the problem with. Nobody should hit anybody, said Cudahy. Well, yeah, I said, obviously. But I'm saying if they had to hit somebody, hit the frat guys, you know? What are you talking about, said Cudahy. She had a sincerity about her, a way of sitting perfectly still, a way of holding eye contact. that made whatever she said seem like the most sensible thing in the world. Nobody had to hit anybody. Nobody should ever hit anybody. Right, I said. That's how I feel too. We lived by a code. We lived in Gray's Ferry because Gray's Ferry was real as fuck. Cudahy used to live east of 25th Street in Point Breeze, but Point Breeze had gotten too gentrified. I decided that the dog band's Bella Vista apartment was too stressful a spot for me, especially since Sudamac had taken up residence on the couch. It was all crushed pills and vodka Red Bulls over there. I didn't need to be around that type of goonery. Cudahy was the same as me. We were done with kid stuff like getting drunk and making bad decisions. We liked mature things, like drinking coffee in the backyard and reading the alternative weeklies. Most days we brewed our own coffee, but sometimes we went out for it. The closest coffee shop was the Dunkin' Donuts in Forgotten Bottom, but we didn't go to that one. We didn't patronize chains. That was part of the code. When we wanted to go for coffee, we walked the 10 blocks to the pharmacy. There we could sit and sip and watch the Point Breeze hipsters in their Castro caps and candy-hued sneakers, and laugh to ourselves about what gentrifying fucks they were. Cudahy got sober about a year before I moved in. That's when she left Point Breeze for Gray's Ferry. She got herself a sober roommate, but the roommate stopped being sober and had to move out. That was why Cudahy was so committed to the code. I didn't really have a code prior to living with Cudahy. I just lived where people would have me, even if it meant tolerating occasional antisocial behavior from the likes of Sudamac and the dog man. I was 8 months sober when Cudahy suggested I move in. She offered me the empty bedroom at a price even I could afford. Part of Gray's Ferry being real as fuck was that it was cheap as fuck. I felt like I'd finally stumbled into having my shit together. Cudahy worked at 2 places, a breakfast place and a sandwich place. The places were both in Point Breeze, where shiny new row houses were quickly rising up in the empty lots between the old ones. There were not a ton of employment opportunities in Gray's Ferry. Yet, said Cudahy, like she was afraid they were coming. I was working as a delivery driver when I moved in, but that too was an antisocial environment. People acted like they didn't have to tip me as long as they avoided looking at me directly. I told Cudahy how I hated it, and she told me I should quit, like it was the simplest thing in the world. I told her I wanted to go back to freelancing, which filled me with a sense of self-determination, and she told me to follow my bliss. So that's what I was doing. There were plenty of gigs out there on the internet. Sometimes I wrote ad copy. Sometimes I wrote listicles. I did a lot of things on spec, and sometimes I didn't get paid for them. It was an inefficient way to make a small amount of money, but I didn't have much else going on, and Cudahy said it was good to keep busy. Sometimes I picked up something fun. One day I wrote flavor profiles for various exotic teas. $15 per profile. The company wouldn't send me the teas, so I had to imagine how each one might taste. What do you think chrysanthemum tastes like? I asked Cudahy from the couch. She looked up from the list she was making in the kitchen and guessed, floral? Nice one, Cudahy, I said, even though I'd already used floral for the Bangalore roast chai. Floral was sort of an obvious one when the tea had a flower right there in its name, but I wanted Cudahy to know how much I valued her opinion. Me and Cudahy didn't do AA. We recognized that it had helped a lot of people, but it wasn't for us. We each had our own reasons. Cudahy rejected the idea of a power greater than herself, and I didn't want to make amends with all the people I'd wronged. It wasn't a pride thing for me. I was being considerate. I was confident the people I'd have to apologize to were uninterested in receiving my apologies. I'm sure they would love to get an apology, said Cudahy. And I'm sure God would love for you to believe in him, I said. We didn't need AA because we had the code. The code wasn't a literal code. Specific rules were articulated on occasion, but it was more of an ethos. Do good things. Don't do bad things. Drink coffee, not booze. We were both raised Irish Catholic, which is why Cudahy didn't believe in God, and why I didn't like making amends. It was why we understood one another so well, even if we sometimes got competitive about our respective upbringings. Cudahy insisted she was more fucked up than me because she went to Catholic schools. But Cudahy grew up with money, so that balanced things out in my opinion. Not that I ever said that to her. She worked 2 jobs, and I was a guest in her house. I wasn't even on the lease or anything. If I had to play shrink, I'd have said Cudahy carried around a lot of guilt with her, just because her dad owned a Mercedes dealership out on the main line, and her family had a beach house in Avalon. I didn't understand why she would feel guilty about those things. The only guilt I felt was for the things I had done personally. In that respect, I was pretty well adjusted. Cudahy was Cudahy's last name. Her first name was Tara. Tara wasn't a great name, sure, but it worked perfectly fine. I didn't know why she felt the need to go by Cudahy. It had been that way since college, where we had lived in the same freshman dorm. It struck me as a bit masculine, her going by Cudahy, but I knew enough not to say so. People called me by my last name too, since Dennis was a terrible first name, but I didn't really care what people called me. Then why do you care what people call me? Asked Cudahy. I'm just curious, I told her. We didn't smoke. That was part of the code. I used to smoke. I had only just quit, right when I moved in with Cudahy. If I wanted to, I could still have smoked away from the house, even if Cudahy had smelled the cigarette fumes on my clothes. She probably wouldn't have said anything about it. Respecting personal boundaries was also part of the code, unless it directly pertained to falling off the wagon. But I didn't smoke anywhere, out of respect for her home, which was not my home, even if I paid a portion of the rent. It was a small portion, less than half, and I hadn't actually paid it yet. We both chewed a lot of gum. Ivan laughed when I told him I'd be living in Grays Ferry. I told him it was cheap, and he said, I bet it is. Honestly, there was not much else to recommend the place. It was a neighborhood of tiny row houses and railroad tracks and overgrown lots, hugged by a muddy bend in the Schuylkill and shackled with highways. The old whites of the neighborhood resented the blacks, so much so that Louis Farrakhan once got involved, and the blacks seemed to resent us new whites, though there weren't very many of us new whites. If some innate charm was a prerequisite for gentrification, the pharmacy set would be a while in following Cudahy to Grays Ferry. That was probably why she liked it. There weren't many bars or stores. There were a fair number of heroin addicts. A few had set up shop in the vacant house at the end of the block, and they shuffled up and down the street at all hours. Sometimes we could hear them rustling in the weeds beyond our fence. I had lived around heroin addicts in other neighborhoods. We'd called them fiends. But I'd never given much thought to their inner lives. Now I couldn't help but stare at them, fascinated by the decisions they had to make and could not make, blown around like phantoms in a phantom city. There but for the grace of God, right, Cudahy? I said. Cudahy shook her head. Grays Ferry was rough, but Cudahy knew how to handle herself. She took self-defense classes at a Muay Thai place on Washington Avenue. You wouldn't have guessed it to look at her, but she probably could have snapped your wrist or broken your nose. Maybe I should take a class, I said. I never really learned how to throw a punch. We agreed that when the shit went down, Cudahy would come to my rescue. We read another story in the paper about a gay couple who were assaulted in Center City. There were 3 assailants, 2 male and 1 female, all violently drunk. The assault upset Cudahy. She said there was an epidemic of hate crimes in the city of brotherly love. Mildly acquainted with hate and drunkenness, I thought that the latter was at fault more than the former. If they hadn't been drunk, I said, it probably wouldn't have happened. If they hadn't been gay-bashing pieces of shit, said Cudahy, it definitely wouldn't have happened. Cudahy's sentiment lay unshakably with the gay couple, as did mine, of course. And yet, I couldn't help but briefly inhabit the perspective of the drunks, who happened to be from Bucks County, just like me. The female assailant was the daughter of the police chief of the town next to the one where I grew up. We'd been in neighboring parishes, attended neighboring high schools and quiet suburbs where people were supposed to behave themselves. I felt guilty for some reason. Not that I had ever bashed a gay couple or wanted to, but I couldn't shake the sense that something broken in that woman might also be broken in me. We didn't fool around, not with each other. That was Cudahy's idea, though I wasn't sure if that was part of the code. Before she suggested it, it never would have occurred to me to fool around with Cudahy. Back when I met her, Cudahy was dating girls. As far as I knew, she'd never stopped. Not so. When I moved in with her, she was with a guy named Nate, who had tattoos of nautical stars on each of his hands. I wanted to ask her what had changed, but I didn't want to sound parochial. You've lived with women before, haven't you? She asked me. Of course, I said. Platonically, she clarified. Of course, I lied. We don't want to risk falling in love, said Cudahy. She said it in a jokey voice, drawing out the words so that they didn't sound so awkward. We shared a sense of humor. Cudahy had changed a lot since college, which was the last time I had spent any time with her. It was mostly house parties then, where we were mostly pretty drunk, and Cudahy didn't speak or act all that differently than me and the guys I hung out with. I wasn't sure which of her changes had come with age and which had come with sobriety. Old Cudahy followed whatever thought fell out of her mouth. New Cudahy seemed to pick her words like she was choosing a perfect cantaloupe. Old Cudahy was impossible to offend, but I feared I was often in danger of offending New Cudahy. I tried not to, of course. I amended my behavior. I followed the code. But it seemed to go deeper than the things I did. Like the problem was more in the things I said and thought, the ways I interpreted the world. I sensed that this New Cudahy sometimes wished that I was a different person. New Cudahy seemed to sometimes wish that even New Cudahy was a different person. Everybody changes, said Cudahy, when I mentioned how she seemed different. I did so with tact. I told her how she seemed to have matured since the days of house parties, back when she always had a blunt tucked under the rim of her beanie and a bag of gummy worms in her sweatshirt pocket. Not that you were immature before, I said. We were wandering back from the pharmacy, alt weeklies in hand. She knew what I meant. You live your life not appreciating what it is, she said, as we passed under the railroad viaduct that squatted above 25th Street. Then something shifts. Like if you moved a bookcase in your house and found a window behind it that you never knew was there, you'd have a whole new view of the world. I thought I knew what she meant. Sobriety is our window, I said. There are lots of windows, said Cudahy. Everybody finds their own windows. I definitely felt like I was seeing Cudahy through a new window. Old Cudahy was my friend. New Cudahy was also my friend, but a friend whose body I found myself sneaking glances at when she walked into the kitchen in her underwear. Cudahy wasn't bashful about flashing her skin. Not that she should have been, she was in her own house after all, and the summer heat seeped in through every aperture. Cudahy had a large tattoo of a sunburst on her thigh, and my eyes often got caught up in its gravity, orbiting like inferior planets until I pried them away. Me and Cudahy observed dance party Sundays. Her friend Smashley Smaniato would come by, and the three of us would go down to the basement, switch on the black light, and gyrate to synthwave. Smashley was Cudahy's best friend from college. The two of them were nearly identical back then, slim and small and spiky-haired, but Smashley had gained some weight and shaved her head, and if Cudahy hadn't told me who was coming over, I don't know that I would have recognized her. The first thing Smashley said when she saw me was, "Is that really Dennis Monk?" She didn't say it like she was pleased, more like she was puzzled or slightly disgusted. Smashley and I had never really clicked for whatever reason. "Stop calling me Smashley," she said as we clomped down the basement stairs, "like you're one to talk." No one got smashed at dance party Sundays. The three of us didn't even dance together. Instead, we took a corner of the basement, Cudahy by the furnace, Smashley by the water heater, and me by the laundry machines. At first, I didn't really know what to do with myself, but when I realized the others weren't looking at me, that they just kept their eyes closed and swayed with the synthy ripples, I was able to let go a bit, to let my arms and legs work out whatever it was they needed to work out. It felt more like exercise than dancing, cathartic and detoxifying, and at the end of an hour or so, the three of us would emerge steaming into the backyard to dry our sweat in the afternoon sun. I let them take the chairs on either side of the little table, and I sat on the back steps, reclined on my elbows. By the end of that first Sunday, I think Smashley had warmed up to me. I started to call her Ash the way Cudahy did, and I told her all about the code. "I like to believe people can change," said Ash, and I remember thinking, yeah, of course people can change. The old monk was never much of a dancer. Nate came by once a week or so. I didn't usually hang out when he was around. I was not a huge fan of Nate. He didn't drink, but he smoked a lot of weed. Not in the house, but sometimes in the backyard. I mentioned this to Cudahy. Weed's non-addictive, said Cudahy, though we both knew it was a gray area. Nate lived in Fishtown. If I were to get pedantic about it, he lived in a part of Kensington that the real estate agents had started calling Fishtown. I told Nate how I used to live in that neighborhood a few years back. I told him how a lot of formative shit had happened to me in that neighborhood. Nate wasn't particularly interested in my formation. He just nodded his graying head at me, gauges wiggling in his earlobes. Nate didn't seem to like me very much, but I guess there was bound to be tension between two men who occupied our positions vis-a-vis Cudahy. She and I spent a lot of time together. There was the coffee, the newspapers, the kitchen, the backyard. We walked to the corner grocery on Tasker, and sometimes to the Pathmark by the Schuylkill, which was a chain supermarket, yes, but which carried things like lentils and Kalamata olives that the corner grocery did not. We listened to records on Cudahy's record player. We watched Netflix on Cudahy's laptop, documentaries, sitcoms, shows where people renovated houses and restaurants and bars. Cudahy had a big, lumpy couch where we lounged as we watched. Sometimes we'd be lounging there and Cudahy would fall asleep with her head on my shoulder. It was comforting to spend time with a person who understood my particular incongruity with the world. I'd never spent time with a person like that before Cudahy. Cudahy and Nate didn't seem to have much sex. I knew because I listened. Not like that, not on purpose. It was a small house and our rooms were quite close to each other. Maybe they were doing it very softly, but I don't think they were doing it at all. Maybe they abstained for my benefit. Maybe that was why Nate was antagonistic toward me. Mostly I just heard them speaking quietly to one another. They probably had sex at Nate's place, I imagined, but Cudahy didn't spend many nights away from home. I think that was also part of the code. Our house was a sober refuge in an impaired world. We didn't eat meat. I did eat meat before I moved in with Cudahy. Cudahy was a vegan. I drew the line at vegetarianism. I found eggs and dairy too pervasive to avoid, and I liked cheese. We could agree on no meat, though. Cudahy knew a ton of vegan recipes. She knew about vegetables I'd never heard of before, jicama and kohlrabi and kabocha. When even the Pathmark did not have the vegetables she required, we rode our bikes across town to the Italian market. Technically, the bike I rode belonged to Nate. It was at the Italian market that I'd run into Cudahy in the first place, following several years of absence from each other's life. I'd been sitting under the umbrella of a sidewalk cafe, taking a breather from the intemperance of the dogman's apartment, and wallowing in the funk that characterized my general emotional state at the time. It was one of those mornings of early sobriety where I would just sit under the vacant sky and think, here I am, most benevolent God, so what comes next? Then Cudahy walked up to me with a head of fennel in her hand and a backpack full of tubers weighing down her spine. Monk, she said, like she was the happiest that any person had ever been to see me. When she heard about my living situation, she invited me to take her old roommate's room. Our hearts were both so big that day at having found each other, old friends, and having encountered in one another the same deficiencies. Us addicts need to stick together, said Cudahy, cupping her hands over mine. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick. I am the second-year fellow, Visual Arts, and I'm very excited that I get to introduce Jim Drain. Hi, Jim. I have kind of a little writing I did, but I'm not a writer. I'm a visual artist, so bear with me. I would like to start off with a quote from Mercy Cunningham that is dear to the artist, and I believe gives a great insight into Jim's work and the way of interacting with the world. My work allows for ambiguity in terms of meaning. I think I prefer that. Dancing is never so underestimating. Sorry. Underestimating, and every inch is snared along the way. It allows for further ambiguity. One of the things this openness does is allow the spectator to creep in or to come out, make up his own mind. Jim Works lives in ambiguity. jumping between sculpture, painting, textiles, and what feels like every other medium under the sun. His work also uses ambiguity to thread together a conversation around capital A, arts, craft, and labor, all equal in visualization, allowing people to enter from a variety of places to enjoy what he creates. His use of bright neon colors, patterns that toy with the eye, shapes that first intimidate, but upon further inspection to embrace you, makes his pieces among the most visually exciting things you'll ever see. From my research, I realized Jim is a collector. He has enough elegant chains, vibrant fabrics, and wacky costumes to fully dress a fabulous Mardi Gras parade. Something that I found that was very sweet through my research again was a quote Jim gave once. Quote, "My dad will find something and go, 'I got this weird thing I think you'll like.' And my friends do it too. And I'm like, 'I'm not a trash collector.'" Which I have had that same experience too. On a personal level, I remember learning about Jim early on in art school, getting goosebumps seeing someone make the kind of art that I wanted to make. I was blown away with the energy of the work, the suck the air out of the room vibrance it had. And I was kind of sad, honestly. That bittersweet feeling we all get when you see something so good that we sort of scared of it. Because I knew there was no way I could make something as good as Jim Drain. But it lit a fire under me, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Jim Drain.
Nick, that was awesome. I feel like I died and came to art heaven being here. So thanks everyone for being here. Thanks Terry and Devin. I'm doing something a little bit different tonight. Being given 20 minutes, usually at a lecture you're like, I could talk for an hour, which is funny. If you knew me when I was like 8, I would do this game with myself. How long can I not talk? And I think I was like 2 days that I didn't talk, which was easy because I was like one of 5 kids, and my mom would forget that I was even in the house, and so. Some apologies before starting. I talk about 2 artists that I really love, and I'm pairing them together not as like a one versus the other, but sort of as a way. This is more like a reflective talk about like where my ideas come from, which is you are all my therapists, I guess. I took a lecture and sort of reduced it down to this sauce. And so with this, I was like, I think I'm coming up with, I think I understand why I do what I do. So maybe this will work out. And I also mentioned a podcaster who I don't listen to. If you listen to Marjorie and Jim in Boston, they mentioned this, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because I'm like thinking about, sorry, another apology. I'm thinking about AI as this sort of source of imagery and for whatever it is. And so I should just start. And I got to this word, which I don't use very often, but for this lecture, it seemed to really fit this word affect, this thing that moves you emotionally, which I think oftentimes art does, and oftentimes it moves you to a truth through affect. So I'll begin with this work, and this was in a show at the Whitney Museum, and I've actually seen it in a few exhibitions. Mike Kelly, who, when I was a sculptor in the 90s, it was like, oh my God, Mike Kelly is making this amazing work, and I don't understand it. He's talking about all these ideas, but I also really love the methods and craft work that he's bringing to it. So this is my apology. I'm sorry for showing this image, but this is what Jim and Marjorie were talking about. And they mentioned Joe Rogan saying there was this video that was made through AI, and ultimately he says, this podcaster says, because I believe that he's capable of doing something that dumb, he believes it as truth. So this idea that you can put your vibes into this machine and it spits out this new kind of truth. And for me, I was like, oh, that is pretty fascinating because it actually exists. Like art does that too. Okay, so here's, again, this is a weird lecture, and I'm sorry, but I was thinking about like what Mike Kelly was, if we look through his glasses, and what would he see in terms of seeing craft? And I say this because oftentimes I'm working in all these different spaces, and sometimes it collapses into one thing where I'm working on sculpture and craft, and oftentimes those things are separate disciplines. But here, Mike Kelly was bringing those things together, and I was like pretty fascinated by that. So here in this work, craft equals care and intimacy and abjection. For Mike Kelly, from his perspective, he was thinking about all these discarded objects that were at thrift stores that were once homemade and given as a gift, and this idea that it's now soiled, and this troubling word called universality, where this you don't really understand, or no one's sort of named behind these objects. So it's this anonymous labor that he's talking about. And if you want to get more deeply into some of the things that he was thinking about, you can read that too. But basically, he was talking about sort of systems, right? Institutional critique is about critiquing systems. So the other artist that I really think about a lot is Zenobia Bailey. And in this work, I actually have never seen it in person, but I've seen her work in person. And I was really fascinated by the skill and craft work that was in this specific piece. And a lot of this work, I was doing research and finding sort of textile-based artists in the class that I was teaching at RISD on textile-based sculpture. And so just looking more into her work, I found this conversation that she was having when she was a student, talking about sort of having this educator that sort of denied and erased this experience that she had growing up. And I love that as a result, there's instead of sort of accepting what her educator was telling her, she said, I'm going to invent something that, this aesthetic of funk. And so that really informed a lot of the work that she did. Okay, we're looking through Zenobia's eyes. Funk itself was, I think, using, creating beauty through meager materials. So like in that Mike Kelly work, we see a lot of those materials that, maybe those crafters were using, existing yarns, maybe even taking apart sweaters and making new things out of them. There's a sense of material history, like Zenobia Bailey's thinking about where those materials come from. In a lot of the work, it's acrylic yarn, but also in this work here, the main space, it's sort of you enter into it as one person. And a lot of the cotton she sourced specifically from from plantations in the South. And then there's a sense of ancestral continuity. She talks about sort of the culture of braiding that she grew up with, but also Ngungun masquerade, which is African dance that uses costuming that is, I would say, pretty similar, and I think she would agree that similar to the costuming that we have here. Also, the act of making itself is a sort of form of healing. If you've ever crocheted, you get into this kind of zone that you are just making, and it's a meditative process. But also, she's thinking about that space of healing here in this place where one person enters and you're sort of having this ceremonial moment. So all these things were coming together. again, there's critical fabulation, if this isn't a familiar term, this idea that, something that she experienced, this erasure that she was being met with, and in many ways, like, this is her way of sort of filling the void of history that with her sculpture. And lastly, this idea of data storage, which I love. Teaching crochet, suddenly, like, looking at weaving diagrams or crochet diagrams, you're looking at a kind of coding, which I love that term, heritage algorithms. This idea that knowledge is passed through this work, that we're putting a history into every single stitch. And there's a language and that is very analogous to digital language. Okay, so returning to Mike Kelly, it made me really think, okay, what is Mike Kelly kind of missing out on? And by sort of talking about structure, this sort of critical analysis of the museum and sort of this power structure that he's part of as an artist. Yes, those things are great to talk about, but I think here Kraft overlooked is the feminized and racialized labor that went into making these works. Often, a lot of these works came from Los Angeles or Detroit, and many of the objects were made by crafters of color. That anonymity it speaks to that structural erasure that he's sort of not picking up, even despite. We can go into the sort of the title of More Love Hours That Can Never Be Repaid, this idea of where a gift is always, there's a debt that's owed. And he's talking specifically about, like, artists sort of being these heroes, this kind of like being presented as sort of heroic, but also sort of making work that as a viewer you're never quite able to repay. And but he's also talking in a different lens about a kind of reparation, which I put a question mark there because he's definitely not talking about reparation that I'm referring to here. Like, he's seeing care as a coerced obligation and universality as a kind of whitening. Again, I love Mike Kelly's work, but through Zenobia Bailey's eyes, I was seeing, okay, this is why I love it, and this is why I'm not also understanding it, or sort of like this is what my work is doing, or where does my work fit into a conversation that speaks to sculpture but also speaks to craft. And I'm learning so much from the craft world that connects you to community. And yeah, I kept going back to this. This was actually in the Whitney Museum in a show under craft, and I remember seeing it and just being like, when you see something, you're like, this is not quite working. And so that's where, thank you for giving this opportunity to sort of like articulate this. But I go back to this idea of affect that oftentimes work does, which I think I've only recently thought about, like, what affect does as a sort of a trope or sort of an element within art. Here I talk about it sort of refuses to sort of look at those sort of structural elements to process and to material. And I think something that I love and that I think, Nick, you probably get into too, is that every stitch has so much meaning to it, and there's so much to learn just in the process and the material itself. And I think overlooking that is problematic. Jumping to the early 2000s, I included this without any text. For me, like, community was really important, and my making in this group that I was part of was done without authorship. We didn't use our names, and there was a sense of narrative behind it. And for me, it was like, oh, this is a great place to sort of bring sculptural ideas But it also was completely annoying because you're working in a collaborative where I would make something and they would say, that looks terrible, you have to redo it. And like, I'm gonna take this apart and you have to resew it for me. You know, like you're kind of working for other people and your ideas have to go through this like litmus test. But it was also informed so many things that I did later. And for me, like that, I'm showing this as sort of the idea, this sort of synesthesia that I was trying to get to. So this is from the Boredoms, and he had a band called Hanar Trash. And in the late 90s in Japan, this idea of like performance beyond performance. Yes, there's some gross things in this, but for me it was like there's music that you were listening to and then learning about this sort of performative side of things. I think for us it was like, okay, how do we do this visually? Like how do we not necessarily cut a dead cat in half with a machete, but sort of like how do we do that so that how do we be provocative but in a way that that can be done through yarn, I guess. And so I guess this was my answer to that, and this is my cat with a machete, I guess. But it was about like throwing everything possible at an object and seeing sort of what happened as a result. There's actually like stained glass somewhere in there too. So that, but looking back, I didn't quite know what I was doing, and that was okay, I guess. I think I understood later that I was really interested in that viscerality that that I from the Boredoms was trying to do. This idea that noise or music could be this textured thing that your body is hearing, not just with your ears, but you're just kind of like experiencing with your whole body. And I think that sort of experience that I was trying to do with this work, having that visceral experience with sculpture, something where you can see it and sort of get lost in, it's kind of wonderful to see again. This is 2007, which is a long time ago. But also a lot, like the back wall was sort of examining these two different patterns too, not very, in a very ambiguous way, and not a very clear way, but I was looking at like how the history of the leopard print through Iggy Pop. There's a lot of Iggy Pop imagery in this show, but also tie-dye and how ubiquitous both have become and sort of lost their meaning and their ubiquity. And so what would happen if you kind of like put them together and they never were supposed to be together? Yes, so that was the premise of that show. This work, or this isn't a Mike Kelly work, but this is a memorial, as it says in the text over there. And I think after seeing the Whitney show, and was I living in Los Angeles? No, this is before I was living there, but I knew a lot of people that worked for Mike Kelly, and I never met him. But it was always, we were in a show together, and he stayed at the hotel the entire time, and so he's kind of, we were like moving like magnets, I guess, opposite magnets, or no, two positive magnets. Anyway, does anyone, I'm learning Arduino, does anyone know that? So you're learning about, I'm so fascinated by current and voltage, and positive and negative. So this, I kept thinking about sort of the premise behind this, and oftentimes there's that universality and that sort of lack of voice. There's subject without a voice necessarily, and here it's completely talking about Mike Kelly's voice, and there's sort of a recreation of that work There's the text here that speaks directly to that work. And I still don't understand. I mean, it's a memorial. There's nothing to really understand. People really loved him. He was really beloved. But I think for me, I just was like, okay, what does sculpture do? What is this doing? And again, it's a memorial, so it's honoring the person that they miss. But these were honoring people that I'd lost too, and it was only recently that I put the two and two together, that I was like, this came a few years after he died, 5 and a half years. But I was thinking about how sculpture holds history through the material, and a lot of this was other sculpture that I'd sort of taken apart, and so I had sort of a relationship or a narrative, maybe like very internal with it, but it was, it just, on the left you can see like an image from the Peaceable Kingdom, which was the first artwork that I had that sort of stayed with me as a 5-year-old at the Cleveland Museum of Art. In this work, I kept asking, like, why am I making sculpture? And for me, it was about sort of this emanating power that sculpture has, and trying to understand what that was. And you see that in the memorial, that sort of like, it doesn't have to be, there's, the idea of perfection is not even, it's like not important. It's more, it's exuding this pathos and love for this person. And for me, it was like, how do I speak about that love for these people that I'm missing and grieving for? And so these kind of became those totems for people. And I call them satellites too. Sort of that energy that is transferred from a satellite, or like goes to a satellite, or the satellite sends that out into the universe. There's only, hopefully I'm not going too long, but so I kept thinking about, like, so oftentimes I would just be in the studio and make work and not really think about like why I was doing it. And this is sort of like I made it a point to be like, I'm really going to talk about these artists that I really, really admire. And there was a show in California, in Northern California, and I kept looking at Barbara Shawcroft's work, who worked in the 70s in crochet. And if you look at this work here, it's mostly made out of jute, which, if you think about how difficult that would have been to crochet, and how I'm sure their hands were like bleeding by the time they were finished. The sad thing is that the Smithsonian has her work, and it was packaged flat, and so taking it apart would destroy it. And so, speaking of erasure, the legs on the left was made for a BART station in San Francisco. It's a subway system that you take, and she talks about the process. It was like really difficult to do public work using ropes and all these potentially flammable materials, and so she did all this research on how to make sure that it was safe. And over the years, like, you can imagine all the dust in the subway station just like clung to legs, and they eventually it was taken out of the building, out of BART, and it no longer exists either. So sort of this language of that, all these artists that are kind of overlooked, and but sort of, so it's been fun to go down the rabbit hole and try to find a lot of her work. She passed away a couple years ago, and there was actually I was notified there was a yard sale of a lot of, and it was not a yard sale, but like an auction at our house. And so there was a ton of work of hers, that like little maquettes that were sold after the fact. Anyway, so the second person, if you've never seen Native Funkin' Flash, it was a really inspiring book, but also if you want to look at cultural appropriation, it's a great book to look into as well. Sort of looking at the handiwork that a lot of the artists in San Francisco were looking at the time. Really, there's an exuberance to it that you can see in this outfit here of all the patchwork and handwork that was done. But also in Bolinas, she made this huge, very dangerous jungle gym called Macrame Park in Bolinas. And I won't play the video, but it's incredible to watch her working on it. It's she and a couple of her friends, and meanwhile, like the men in the back are like drinking beers, and they're just like sweating so hard to make this macrame. And it was interesting to see the gender differences happening for the making of this. So just two artists that I think have done incredible work, and I wanted to sort of talk about their work too. And also just, I love psychedelic colors. So this was the result. The parameters, I've never been given parameters like this. The curator is awesome, but she was like, you have to make work that has to get broken down every other week because we do lectures in this space. And I was like, oh, that's a really good design problem. So it really determined what I could make. And there's a huge window that looks out into this lake over there. So I was like, the space itself is beautiful. And so let's bring these macrame walls that can be moved around in space, and you can make your own space within there. And then these lounge chairs and smaller chairs could sort of also, you kind of make an exhibition with an exhibition. And so this was also really fun. I want to make more owls like that, which I should give credit. This was made not by my hands. I had a lot of help with this. So when I say I want to make more owls like this, I want to learn how to make more owls like this. Then this just happened recently, and it made me think about that word from the beginning. I have to go back because I can't remember the word. Affect. Yeah, so I don't even know, I made this work, and I've been teaching a lot, and this public art project sort of happened, and I was thinking, I guess now that I look at it with the lens of affect, I'm like, what was I trying to say with this? But somehow those sunglasses still make me laugh. Another thing I did last year, but that's just, I want to keep it short and sweet. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone. And so now we're actually going to invite Jim and Mike up to these beautiful blue chairs, and we'll have a little Q&A from the audience. So as we do this like transitional moment, start to think about the questions, because you're on the spot next. No, it's in another part of my response. Okay, I'm getting schooled by the fellows. Y'all, I have a whole nother section of remarks, and the calendars are in the remarks. I have not forgotten you. Don't worry. We have beautiful calendars up for sale tonight. I will go into them further in my next section of remarks that I have planned and repeated for many hours in preparation for tonight. However, before we get to that moment, and as we invite Mike and Jim back up to the stage, the fellows would like me to, I love y'all. We do have calendars for sale that the that the Visual Arts and Writing Fellows themselves have created. They're stunning. They've actually, all of the pages of the calendar are up on the wall to my left, your right. and they are available for purchase. I will do a later pitch in more detail. However, just start to percolate and think about buying this beautiful piece of art that is timely. Okay, thank you. And so now I would love to invite Michael and Jim back up to the stage. And so with that, we are, it's y'all's time. So we're gonna open the questions up to the audience. Terry and other colleagues in the audience, or other colleagues from FAWC, will be roaming around the audience and finding you when you raise your hand to ask a question. Anyone have a burning question they wanna kick off for our amazing speakers tonight? Scene. And Joe is coming up right behind you.
This is more of a technical question for Jim. Is that slideshow available anywhere, or the slideshow
Sure.
with so much information in there that I'd want to go back and look at?
If you write your email down, I'll just share it through
Okay.
Google Drive.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
sure.
Thanks.
That was such a good soft entry question. So hopefully gave everyone else a moment to think. And who's next? Who has a question for our panelist? Oh, yep. They're coming to you.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you each could talk a little bit, in both your work, there's a sense of ritual, whether it's the ritual of the dance that's happening on Sundays or in your work. And I wonder if you could each talk about the role that ritual plays in your work.
Mike, tell us about your
Yeah, that's a good question. Ritual. I feel like I'm maybe more attracted to the idea of ritual than I like am good at maintaining rituals. I think like there is an aspect of sobriety that's sort of wrapped up in rituals, and that you have to kind of like repeat certain behaviors in order to like avoid other behaviors. And like the sort of the whole idea of having a writing practice is also kind of like that too. They're both sort of attempts to enforce structure onto your own like compulsions, I guess. But yeah, ritual, calling it a ritual versus just like a regimen or something, I think it gives it kind of like a nice spiritual dimension that I don't know that I always feel in all of my activities, but I think like maybe I aspire to.
Maybe, do you think teaching is a ritual? Like, is there a ritual behind that?
Teaching? No, I think that's for money. Do you think there's a ritual in teaching?
Yeah, like the syllabus is like your dance performance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know. The rituals of every day. I guess everybody has rituals, kind of, right? I don't know. How does it work in your work?
I think my brain works better in sort of a place of ritual. I think I see a therapist sometimes, and she just called it neurospicy. So for me, like knitting was a way. Like I get so distracted. Like as you can see, I love different materials. So like try keeping me focused is sometimes like when I say you try keeping. I mean me try keeping myself focused. It's hard, and so like knitting was a way to like really bring a structure that I needed, where there's like an actual thing, there's a learning curve to the things that I was doing, and it allowed me to be, okay, let me take this step by step. And, but then there are all these like other benefits to it of like, learning community through like a crafting community that is like so generous with all the things that they've learned. And yeah, for me, like whether it was music performance, ritual was like a really important, it's like a really it's been a really important thing to like consider, because I think it gets overlooked so often. Like other thing I was going to say was that oftentimes it's the ritual, like is, maybe you find this is like having, do you feel like writing is a conversation with yourself oftentimes? That's a leading question, because I feel like in art it's oftentimes that's the case, like drawing or working in a notebook. It's like you're like talking to yourself, like what am I interested in, what am I, when you see it on a page you're like, oh, this is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I think there's an extent to which ritual is you need ritual to kind of open yourself up to that conversation that you're trying to have. In the same way, like religious ritual is like I'm getting in the headspace to communicate with God, and like your writing ritual is like, okay, I'm gonna light this candle because that's gonna like tell my brain that it's writing time.
Yeah, lighting candles helps.
Yeah, so candles, I think, is the answer to that.
We have them over there for $5 if you want some.
Any additional questions?
Hi.
Like,
Mike's coming your way. Give me 1 second. Mike and Mike.
I would ask, not on?
I can repeat it if you just want to.
I can hear you too. Very moving. Your writing was very moving.
Thank you.
Where do you go from here? Can you write outside addiction? Where do you go from here? Can you move on? Or is that part of you always?
No, I don't think it is really. It's sort of weird. Like when I came to Provincetown, and it still felt very close to me, and that's when I was really working on this book. And I finished this book a while ago. It sort of just took a really long time to find someone to publish it, and I do think that I had moved on in my life a little bit, and then having to like. The process of putting the book out and talking about it all the time, I almost had to like remind myself a little bit of like what it was like back in that earlier stages of sobriety. Like I'm not an AA or anything. Well, I think there's an extent that like 12-step programs can sort of keep you in the mindset of being an addict sort of indefinitely, which is fine, but that's just was not my journey or whatever. So in ways I have a little bit of like imposter syndrome when like I'm now like talking to a lot of people about alcoholism when like I haven't had a drink in like 12 years and truly don't think about it very often. But I, in terms of, I think I'm sort of stuck in the autobiographical mode for better or for worse in my fiction. And so it continues to like be, if not a topic, like it's always sort of in the background. And so I kind of keep finding ways that it feels, it gets on the page in one way or another. But thank you.
And I think, Nick, you had a question, right?
Yeah. I'm just curious for both of you guys about just like close quarters living. I know you talk about like couch hopping and I guess my question is about creativity and close quarters living. I know that you were couch hopping. You talk a lot about, your roommate. And I know, Jim, you were in Fort Thunder, which was looks like a very intense, tight living situation.
What's Fort Thunder?
It was a live workspace in Providence, Rhode Island, in a warehouse, and there were 12 to 15 of us, and rabbits and cats. And it was really, from my 50-year-old perspective, it was pretty gross. But being 22 is like the most amazing thing ever. And there was indoor wrestling and music venues or music shows that happened in there, and it was a real. I really felt like all my beliefs started from there, and that sense of community was so important and collaboration. So tight living. There's a joke about the miracle that Jesus performed was actually that he had 12 friends at 33 years old. And so in your 20s, I think what I loved was that sort of sense of like, just rolling out of bed and someone was like playing drums and like, or rolling into bed and someone was playing drums and like you had to go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and like, that sort of that ease of couch surfing in New York City, like being in Providence, you're carpetbagging to New York and like I never had to pay rent because I always had someone who I could sleep on the couch with. So it just opened that sort of sense of camaraderie, like we're all helping each other without like being strategic about like what this really means. It just like that sense of, it's pretty idyllic to talk about it, just like that sense of like we're all creative people, let's support each other, and you're building a family. Like that sense of family was really important.
I do wonder, like, if it is it like how much of it is just like being in your 20s, you have like you're sort of forced to be around other people, or like you want to be around other, like is me really enjoying not living with a bunch of other people? Is that me being in my 30s, or is that like just because I actually don't like it, or like but I think I'll say, at least from a fiction writer's perspective, like other people are material, and the more time you spend in close quarters with other people, the more material you generate quickly, which is great. And like now that I have a much more like, I just live with my wife and don't have to spend more than a few hours with anyone else at a time, and don't really have enough time to like get annoyed at other people anymore. It's like much harder to like generate like fun situations for characters. So I think as long as you can tolerate it, you should keep it going.
The replacement for that is like taking knitting class. I'm taking like a knitting class and a sewing class, and like I love that sort of cross-generational conversation that happens, and that for me is what is like I thrive from, as opposed to like, yo, we're gonna get the next pizza kind of thing.
Hi, my question is for Michael. It sounds like you have a lot in common with your character, and I'm wondering how you exercise self-discipline so that your character departs from you and his life departs from yours.
Thank you. That's a really good question. It's a hard, like, sort of boundary to find. And I think, like, for when you first start writing something, you almost shouldn't worry about it too much and just try and get stuff out there on the page. One sort of benefit that I had, as I mentioned, like it kind of, I wrote the book and then it didn't get published for a while. Like 4 or 5 years passed, and then I sort of returned to it. And by that point, just the fact that I had lived another 5 years and was farther from that period in my life, it became easier to view my narrator as a character who is distinct from me, and he did not have to like do the things that I did or think the things that I thought, and that made it a lot easier to like sort of allow him and his story to be what they kind of needed to be, as opposed to just like diaristic sort of, true autobiography. But I think I don't know, that's always like, I think attention, because you want some real stuff, because the real stuff I think resonates the most. But too much of it can be a little, it can get stale, and I think that's some of the issue with, I don't know, some autofiction is, I think, the unwillingness to shape it a little bit, for the benefit of the narrative.
I feel like I saw a question from the fellows. No? Oh, okay, okay. Anyone else?
Oh, I think about it all the time. I haven't applied in a while. I really want to come back. The more time passes, though, kind of the less likely. I don't like, you need that space in your life, and I feel like we were talking about this earlier, but I feel like the best time to do the second year is like right after the first year, probably, because you've already like put everything on hold, and now I would have to figure out how to do that again. But I'll come back as like an old man. Like I'm definitely going to do it at some point. So maybe that would be more useful in some ways to just do it many years from now.
Same. I thought David had a question. No? Oh, we're doing it.
Thanks.
Thank you both, Jim and Michael. We really appreciate it. Feel free to exit the stage. Thank you both. So I know I just said it, but I'm going to say it again. Thank you, Jim and Michael, so much for spending the evening with us and sharing so much about yourselves and your practice. We really greatly appreciate it. After we finish in this room, we'll invite you to visit the Fellows Open Studios, and again, Ability Dance in the gallery, and of course, purchase your copy of Michael's book at the back table that he'll also be back there to sign. I also wanted to mention a very special announcement that we're also excited to share the release of FAWC's second annual calendar, produced right here at FAWC in our print studio on our risograph printer. If you're curious about the risograph and want to learn more about it or see its magic up close, please say hello to Vicki in the print shop after we leave this room. And she is running a hands-on activity, but also would be happy to speak to you about the risograph printer. We've hung, as I mentioned earlier, we've hung all of the pages of the new calendar over here on the wall, so everyone can see all of its beauty. It is stunning. It's stunning. I'm so excited that I have one at my desk. I'm so excited to have one. I wanted to mention that the calendar truly was a community effort. It's featuring work not only by the Visual Arts Fellows, but also our Writing Fellows. And it was really a community activity of love. And so if you love what you see, we'd love for each of you to take it home. And so in the theme of tonight's conversation, especially with Jim here in our presence, I just wanted to continue lift up the idea of making the invisible work visible. That so much invisible work happens within the art world, visual art world in particular. And so I just wanted to mention that the actual cost to produce each calendar was $40. However, we want everyone in this room to fall in love with what you see and take one home. And so tonight, they are all pay what you wish or pay what you can. So they'll also be over at the table with the books for sale. So please think about taking one home with you tonight. The next FAWC Friday is February 6th. We'll be welcoming two very special guests, the acclaimed visual artist Shabalala Self and FAWC Fellow alum and Pulitzer Prize winning author Paul Harding. We have been so grateful to spend this evening in community with all of you. And so before we depart this room and before you start to explore the gallery and purchase your calendars and check out the Fellows Open Studios, I am beyond honored to welcome Elise Patterson and Abilities Dance to the stage for a special performance.
Hi, my name is Elise Patterson. I'm the founder, executive, and artistic director of Abilities Dance Boston, which uses dance and art overall to promote disability justice in the greater Boston area and beyond. I'm really honored to be here with my friend, colleague, and director of music, Andrew Cho, who we've been working on setting the groundwork both with our music, with the choreography and storyline and movement of our next ballet, Firebird Part 2, which premieres Juneteenth weekend. Highly recommend you come through, not just in person in Boston's BU Theater, but it also on Juneteenth will be live streamed so that folks can access it. So if you want more information, go to abilitiesdanceboston.org for that. To give you a little bit of background in this work, who I am, what I do, I'm going to be really quick because I just asked if I could just be here for like 3 minutes, so I'm trying to go. So my background, I'm originally from Mississippi, as is my family. I grew up there. I'm very close to my still living 95-year-old grandmother. Will be 96 next month. So I have a very close relationship to my family and our family stories, as well as the stories of her grandmother who was enslaved and the storylines of that where it really wasn't that long ago. So themes of that, of liberation from a Firebird ballet that I created 5 years ago. And this ballet has a central theme of what if the Firebird stops saving everyone else and saves herself instead? And how that kind of proliferates through universes and explores themes around gender, around immigration, around Black women holding up everything and getting so exhausted, and around, of course, disability and the multiple ways in which we are both erased as well as magnified way too much, as well as just asked, what is your disability, which we as a culture should not ask. And so this really helps me to express more than I can by just preaching it to someone. Showing it in a ballet has done much more for the movement, and so that has been that. In this particular time, I actually grew up playing the dulcimer, which if you're new to this, the dulcimer is an instrument that is used in bluegrass and early blues music. It is now pretty rare, so when people move it, I'm like, and then I release, because you can't find people to make it anymore, and I had a lovely friend, this is my childhood dulcimer that was made then. And so it has been near and dear, and I wanted to bring it back, especially with my grandmother singing over it, to kind of bring in those storylines of what it means to feel all of this, feel the weight of generations of exhaustion, but feel the weight of generations of strength. And the dulcimer has helped to do that for me to connect with family, for me to connect with community, and with so many others. and that we are not just one thing. I'm a dancer, I'm a choreographer, but right now I'm a musician and a dulcimer player. And it couldn't have happened without Andrew, who retuned it, who tuned it to my grandmother's voice, and conducted along the way to make it sound as good as it did. So I want to say a special thank you to Andrew for making that possible. And also feel free to stop by our studios in there to learn more about the background, around the storyline, about just what it is like to exist in this work as a Black disabled queer woman who is leading a thing for a decade plus, but also exhausted. So I hope you will enjoy.
Sweet chariot coming to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot coming to carry me home. Oh, if you get there before I do, coming to carry me home. Tell all of my friends I'm coming on too. Coming. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming to carry me home. Oh, if you get there before I do, coming to carry me home. Tell all of my friends I'm coming on too. Coming to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming to carry me home. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down, coming to carry me home. But still my soul feels heavenly bound, coming to carry me home. That's it.
Thank you for your patience in a wild key and a wonky playing. But, you know, this is why we're in residency. It's a little rough now. In June, it'll be great. Thank you.
So I just wanted to say and invite everyone. So at this point, the program in this room is concluding. They're bringing down the slideshow to show kind of different what studios are open and many other important information. But please check out some open studios, go into the gallery, visit the print shop, and just thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.